It has been a wedding wish for a happy future, and a heartbreaking symbol of a world that was. This is the story of the diamond ear of wheat and how one audacious choice by Empress Joséphine in Paris sparked a royal trend across Europe. Its legacy was defined by two other legendary rulers, Empress Maria Feodorovna of Russia, who commissioned a piece of breathtaking patriotic beauty, and Queen Victoria of Great Britain, who quietly turned the motif into an unbreakable family tradition. So, join me as we trace this one symbol to uncover how it connected these three women, touched countless other royal families, and why its fate would be so dramatically different in each one. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. To understand how it all began, we have to go back to a specific summer's day in Paris, July 15, 1804. The newly crowned Empress Joséphine was attending her first major state ceremony, and according to one courtier, she simply outshone all the ladies of her suite. She wore a gown of rose-colored tulle, spangled with silver stars, but it was what rested in her hair that sent the real message. Not the fleur-de-lis of the old Bourbon kings, not a traditional crown, but a cascade of diamond ears of wheat. It was a masterstroke of symbolism, of course, a nod to prosperity and abundance, a very deliberate statement that this new empire rose from the earth, from the people, not from ancient bloodlines. What she couldn't have known was that this one moment would ignite a trend that would define an era. And that trend begins with a breathtaking tiara made just a few years later for Napoleon's favorite and most talked about sister. Her name was Pauline Borghese, born Bonaparte. She was a fascinating and complex figure, known across Europe for her beauty, her charisma, and a life filled with love affairs and a certain disdain for the rules. She was the one sibling who didn't seem to participate in Napoleon's political power games, preferring a life of social conquest. For Napoleon himself, she was the best creature in the world, the only one who never seemed to ask him for anything. Though she could be frivolous, she was also fiercely loyal, visiting him in his first exile on Elba and even offering to join him in his final one. She was a true icon of imperial style, and in 1811, the court jeweler, François Regnault-Nitot, created this masterpiece for her. Just look at it, a cascade of 18 individual ears of wheat, crafted from gold and silver and alive with the sparkle of old-cut diamonds. Each one is a work of art in itself, designed with an engineer's mind and an artist's soul. The entire tiara was a transformer, a marvel of versatility. The ears could be detached and worn individually as brooches, scattered through an elaborate updo, or gathered together into a brilliant sheaf to be pinned at the waist. It's a piece that feels both grand and surprisingly light, as if the jeweler managed to freeze a handful of wheat tossed by a summer wind. The neoclassical style of the Empire period, inspired by the discoveries at Pompeii, was all about this kind of naturalistic elegance, and this tiara is a perfect expression of it. And unlike so many jewels of that era, this one survived intact. After Pauline's death from cancer in 1825, with no surviving children, the tiara passed to her husband, Prince Camillo Borghese. From him, it was inherited by his brother's line, remaining a private treasure of the Borghese princes of Italy for nearly 200 years. It saw the fall of kingdoms and the rise of republics, all while resting quietly in a family vault. Then, in November 2021, it emerged into the light, appearing at a Christie's auction in Geneva. The final price was 810,000 Swiss francs, and it vanished once more, this time into an anonymous private collection. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? To know such a historic piece is out there, but hidden from view, its story now continuing in secret. The same master jeweler, Nitot, was, of course, at the heart of this trend. His workshop, which would one day become the famous house of Chaumet, was responsible for the most important imperial commissions. This brings us to another beautiful wheat ear tiara, one with a direct and very well-documented link to the imperial court. It's composed of 9 exquisite ears of wheat, glittering with more than 66 carats of diamonds, and its history, confirmed by Chaumet itself, is quite remarkable. In 1811, Napoleon's second wife, the Empress Marie-Louise, placed an extraordinary order with Nitto. She was preparing for the birth of their son, the long-awaited heir, and the emperor wanted to celebrate with overwhelming splendor. The order was for a staggering 150 diamond wheat ears, intended to be part of the French crown jewels. It was a statement of imperial grandeur on an almost unimaginable scale. After the fall of the empire, most of those pieces were later dismantled by the restored Bourbon monarchy, their diamonds repurposed to erase the memory of the Bonapartes. But 9 of them somehow survived. And it is from these very survivors, these authentic relics of Marie-Louise's commission, that this tiara was later created. So, while the diamonds themselves belong to Napoleon's second empress, the idea, the spirit of the piece, is pure Josephine. It was her vision that made the wheat ear a symbol of her era. The final chapter in the story of these 9 surviving ears is their journey back to their origins. They eventually found their way back to the workshops of their creator, and the House of Chaumet masterfully mounted them as the tiara we see today. In 2011, this piece was formally recognized as a cornerstone of their heritage collection, a tangible link to their own Napoleonic history, and a fitting tribute to the vision that started it all. And that vision was spreading with incredible speed, not just within Napoleon's immediate family, but to the great royal houses of Germany that were now in his orbit. This brings us to another magnificent Nitto creation, the Bavarian ears of wheat tiara. Its story begins in 1810, a pivotal year for the Kingdom of Bavaria. The Bavarian king, Maximilian I Joseph, was a key ally of Napoleon and spent several months that year at the Parisian court. While he was there, he commissioned Bavaria's new royal regalia, the crown, scepter, and orb, directly from Nitto, and during this same visit, his son and heir, the future King Ludwig I, was engaged to Princess Teresa of Sachsen-Hildburghausen. It is almost certain that the king acquired this tiara of 14 diamond wheat ears from Nitto as a wedding present for his new daughter-in-law. Their wedding, by the way, was so celebrated by the citizens of Munich that the anniversary festival became an annual tradition you might have heard of, Oktoberfest. Like the other creations of the era, Queen Teresa's tiara was versatile. We see her in a portrait from the 1820s wearing not a tiara, but 8 of the sparkling ears pinned directly onto the bodice of her gown. The tiara remained a treasured heirloom of the ducal house of Bavaria for centuries, passed down through the family and worn by descendants like Duchess Gabrielle at her wedding. For a long time, it was a private jewel, but like Pauline Borghese's tiara, it recently came back into the public eye when it was scheduled for auction at Sotheby's in November 2024, another piece of Napoleonic history returning to the open market after 200 years. So, from Paris to Munich, the wheat ear was cementing its status as the ultimate symbol of imperial chic, and it was about to travel even further north with a woman whose own life was inextricably linked with Napoleon's. But this fashion wasn't just for the empresses or Napoleon's favorite sister. The trend spread quickly through the wider imperial circle, and one of the most interesting journeys began with a woman named Désirée Clary. If that name sounds familiar, it's because she was once Napoleon's first fiancée. Their engagement was broken, and she went on to marry one of his top marshals, Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte. The story goes that Napoleon never quite forgot her, and always held a soft spot for the Bernadotte family. When he encouraged his marshals to ensure their wives were suitably bejeweled for court functions, the Bernadottes acquired their own set of around 15 flexible diamond ears of wheat, also believed to be from Nitto's workshop around 1804. And these jewels were destined for a remarkable journey. In 1818, after a series of political shifts, Désirée's husband was elected heir to the Swedish throne, and she, the merchant's daughter from Marseille, became Queen Desideria of Sweden. Her French jewels traveled with her to her new northern kingdom. She passed them to her daughter-in-law, Queen Joséphine, who in turn gifted the wheat ears to her granddaughter, Princess Lovisa of Sweden, when she married into the Danish royal family in 1869. And it was as Queen Lovisa of Denmark that she continued the tradition, eventually passing the Napoleonic set to her third son, Prince Harold of Denmark. For decades, the tiara was worn by his wife, Princess Helena, and here, the story takes its most unusual turn. When Princess Helena passed away in 1962, her will contained a very specific instruction. The tiara was not to be immediately divided. Instead, it was to be loaned for a full 10 years to the wife of her younger son, Countess Dorrit of Rosenborg. And that's exactly what happened. In the early 1970s, the decade was up, and the grand Napoleonic set was finally distributed among Princess Helena's descendants. It ceased to exist as a single piece. Princess Helena's daughter, Princess Feodora, was seen wearing a much-reduced version with just 4 of the diamond ears, which she even loaned to her daughter-in-law for her wedding in 1977. But after that, the trail for that particular piece goes cold. What we do know for certain is the fate of another part of the inheritance. Princess Helena's other daughter, hereditary Princess Caroline Matilda, took her share of the ears and had them completely refashioned. She commissioned a new, more modern spike tiara for her sister-in-law, Countess Anne Dorte of Rosenborg. And this new creation, the Rosenborg spike tiara, would go on to have a long and happy life of its own. It was worn for decades by Countess Anne Dorte, and later by her 3 daughters, Camilla, Josephine, and Feodora, at countless Danish royal events. It's a powerful reminder of how these grand imperial jewels lived on, transforming from symbols of an empire into cherished and sometimes completely altered family heirlooms. And so the seeds sown in Paris began to sprout across the continent, but nowhere would they find more fertile ground or a more steadfast guardian than in the court of Napoleon's greatest rival, Great Britain. The British chapter of this story begins not as a grand tiara, but as a set of magnificent brooches. In 1830, just as the Bourbon Restoration was collapsing in France, King William IV commissioned 6 sparkling diamond wheat ear brooches from the royal jewelers, Rundle and Bridge. They were a gift for his wife, Queen Adelaide. It's interesting to think that at the very moment the legacy of the Bonapartes was being suppressed in Paris, the British court was calmly adopting one of its most elegant motifs. When King William died in 1837, the brooches were passed to his young niece, the new Queen Victoria. For her, they became trusted favorites, often used to embellish the necklines of her grand evening gowns. And after her death, she ensured their survival, designating them as heirlooms of the crown. This meant they belonged not to a person, but to the monarchy itself, passed from one queen to the next. They've had some memorable outings since. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, wore them during that legendary state visit to Paris in 1938. When they passed to our late Queen Elizabeth II in 1952, she gave them a new life. While she wore them traditionally as brooches, she also had this wonderfully creative habit of using them as hair slides for less formal evening events, tucking them into her famous updos in place of a heavy tiara. It was a flash of modern, personal style. And in 2018, we saw that tradition continue when she loaned 3 of the brooches to her granddaughter, Princess Eugenie, who wore them in her hair for her wedding dinner. A perfect full-circle moment connecting Queen Adelaide to a 21st century royal bride. But the Queen's brooches weren't the only set of diamond wheat ears in the wider royal family. Around the same time Victoria was inheriting her set, another collection was making its appearance, one with a very different and perhaps more romantic destiny. We first meet this tiara in the 1850s. In the jewelry box of Queen Victoria's cousin, Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, the Duchess of Teck. She was a granddaughter of King George III, a larger-than-life personality known for her good humor. We know she wore a wreath of silver wheat ears to a state ball as early as 1857. It's not clear if she was the first owner, but she was certainly the one who made them famous. When she died, the tiara took an interesting path. It wasn't inherited by her daughter, who would become the formidable Queen Mary. Instead, it went to her youngest son, Prince Alexander of Teck, and in 1904, he presented the tiara to his bride, Princess Alice of Albany, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, as a wedding present. It became her signature piece. She wore it beautifully at the 1911 coronation of her brother-in-law, King George V, the ears arranged in a striking fan shape against her coronet. And from there, the tiara's story becomes one of quiet family tradition. Princess Alice had only one child who had a family of her own, and the tiara became a treasured bridal loan for her descendants. Her granddaughter, Anne Abel Smith, wore it for her wedding at Windsor in 1957. It has appeared at other family weddings since, transforming from a grand court diadem into a deeply personal heirloom for a non-reigning branch of the family. A much quieter but no less lovely fate. But sometimes, a jewel's story isn't about grand sets or unbroken lines of succession. Sometimes it's about a single, beautiful piece and the very personal bond between a mother and her daughter. And that brings us to our third British wheat ear, a spectacular diamond brooch that belonged to Princess Margaret. Its origins are a complete mystery. It's an antique piece, but we have no idea who made it or where it came from. It was likely a gift, perhaps for her 21st birthday. It first appears in 1951, worn by a young, dazzling Princess Margaret at glittering post-war balls and on royal tours. It suited her perfectly. It was glamorous, sophisticated, and just a little bit dramatic. She wore it with the Cartier halo tiara for a state visit in 1954 and on a tour of the Caribbean in 1955. It was part of her high-fashion arsenal. And then, it vanished. After the 1950s, the brooch was not seen in public for nearly 50 years. When Princess Margaret passed away in 2002, many of her famous jewels were sold at a landmark Christie's auction. But the wheat ear brooch was not among them. It had been quietly set aside and inherited by her only daughter, Lady Sarah Chatto. It reemerged softly, without fanfare, in 2008, and has been worn by Lady Sarah for poignant family occasions ever since, including the memorial service for the Duke of Edinburgh in 2022. It's a beautiful continuation of the story. The way she wears it, simply, elegantly, often on a dark coat, is so different from her mother's high glamour, yet it speaks volumes about memory and enduring love. And so, in Britain, the wheat ear motif found three very different expressions: a state treasure, a romantic family heirloom, and a mysterious personal jewel. But while the British wheat ears flourished, their Russian counterparts were destined for a far more turbulent and ultimately heartbreaking fate. This brings us to the great lost jewel of this story, the Russian field diadem. It was commissioned in the late 19th century by Empress Maria Feodorovna, wife of Tsar Alexander III. This was not just another magnificent tiara for the Romanov court, which was already overflowing with treasures. This piece was deeply personal. The Empress, born a Danish princess, wanted something that would forever remind her of the vast golden fields of her adopted homeland. The commission went to the Duval brothers, who created a piece of sublime patriotic poetry. This wasn't a static arrangement of wheat. It was an entire field, frozen in diamonds. Looking at the only surviving photograph, you can see this incredible, naturalistic composition, where every stalk seems to sway in the wind, reaching for the light. It was a tribute to the soul of Russia, crafted in diamonds. The Empress treasured it, and even stipulated in her will that it should one day enter the Diamond Fund of Russia. But it never did. After the revolution, in 1927, the tiara was among the imperial jewels sold off by the new Soviet government at a massive auction held by Christie's in London. And after that sale, it simply vanished. All we have left is a single, grainy, black and white photograph, a ghost of its former splendor. There are rumors, of course. Some speculate it was dismantled. its magnificent diamonds sold off separately. Others whisper that it might still exist, intact, hidden away in a private vault somewhere between Prague and Switzerland. We can only guess at its true brilliance. The only tangible reminder today is a replica, created in the 1980s for the Diamond Fund in Moscow. And it's in this recreation that its creators, inspired by the original, brought the idea of the field to life with new details. Golden ears of rye and platinum flax capsules reach for a sun, a large golden diamond. It's a stunning piece, but it's also a constant, poignant reminder of the magnificent original that was lost to the world. But not all Russian wheat ears met such a definitive end. Some, in a strange twist of fate, had already left the country long before the revolution began, carried away by Romanov Grand Duchesses who married into other European royal houses. And that is the story of the Dutch ears of wheat tiara. Its life began as a set of 8 exquisite diamond wheat ear brooches created around 1800. They belonged to Grand Duchess Catherine Pavlovna, the sister of Anna Pavlovna, who would become Queen of the Netherlands. Catherine brought the brooches with her when she married into a German royal house, and they were eventually inherited by her only daughter, Sophie. And when Sophie married the future King of the Netherlands in 1839, the brooches came with her. For decades, they remained in the Dutch vaults. When Queen Sophie died, she left them to her son, Prince Alexander. But after his unexpected death, they were inherited by his young half-sister, the future Queen Wilhelmina. She was seen wearing them on a traditional kokoshnik headdress, but it was in the 1950s that they were given their modern form, when the 8 brooches were mounted on a simple wire frame to create the versatile tiara we know today. It can be worn with 4, 6, or all 8 ears. And it was through Princess Margaret's branch of the family that the tiara found its modern purpose. It has since become a cherished bridal tradition. When her 4 sons got married, each of their brides wore the ears of wheat tiara on their wedding day. The tradition has been worn by other royal brides in the family too. And what makes this story even more remarkable is that this wasn't the only set of Russian wheat ears to make that journey. Through the very same line of inheritance, from Grand Duchess Catherine Pavlovna down to Queen Wilhelmina, another historic wheat ear brooch also made its way into the Dutch vaults. That brooch has since been dismantled, and it is these ears that we now see Queen Maxima wearing so creatively as sparkling hair ornaments and, on one occasion, even affixed to her hat. It's an incredible thought, isn't it? That not 1 but 2 sets of these Russian jewels, which so easily could have shared the fate of the field diadem, instead became symbols of new beginnings and happy marriages in a different land. And it turns out, Catherine Pavlovna's brooches weren't the only Romanov wheat ears to find a safe haven abroad. A strikingly similar story unfolded in the Hesse royal family. Their magnificent ears of wheat tiara also originated in Russia as part of the trousseau of Grand Duchess Alexandra Nikolaevna when she married Prince Frederick William of Hesse-Kassel in 1844. Tragically, Alexandra died from tuberculosis less than a year after her wedding. The wheat ears were later assembled into a tiara by her husband's second wife, Princess Anna of Prussia. For decades, it was a treasured family piece, but its greatest drama was yet to come. In 1925, it was given as a wedding gift to Princess Mafalda of Savoy, an Italian princess who had married into the Hesse family. Mafalda's story is one of the great tragedies of the Second World War. After Italy surrendered to the Allies, she was tricked by the Nazis and imprisoned in Buchenwald concentration camp, where she was killed during an Allied bombing raid. Meanwhile, the Hesse family, fearing the worst, buried their most precious jewels, including the tiara, in a cellar at their family home, Schloss Friedrichshof. After the war, the castle was requisitioned as an American officers' club. The jewels were discovered, stolen, and smuggled out of Germany. It was a devastating loss, But miraculously, after the thieves were caught, about 10% of the treasure was recovered, and among it was the ears of wheat tiara. After surviving so much tragedy, it has, like its Dutch cousin, become a symbol of continuity and hope, worn by generations of Hesse brides at their weddings. From Russia to Germany and the Netherlands, the wheat ear had proven its resilience. And the motif also found a home in Italy, though through a completely different path. The Savoy ears of wheat and flower tiara was created by the celebrated Italian jeweler Mussi. Its diamond wheat ears originally belonged to Queen Elizabeth of Prussia, demonstrating the motif's broad cross-continental appeal. But the tiara's true heyday was in the glamorous post-war era. It was worn by Princess Maria Pia of Savoy for her wedding in 1955, and again by her sister, Princess Maria Beatrice, at the grand wedding balls of the future King Juan Carlos of Spain and King Constantine of Greece in the 1960s. These were some of the last great gatherings of old European royalty, and the tiara was right there. Its most unique feature is a detachable diamond flower at its center. And while the tiara itself hasn't been seen in public for many years, that flower has been given a new life. It's now worn as the clasp on a beautiful pearl necklace by the Princess of Naples, the wife of the current head of the House of Savoy. It's a wonderful example of how a historic piece can be adapted, ensuring its story continues in a new and elegant way. And there we have it. The journey of this one simple motif from a brilliant idea in Josephine's Paris to the royal houses all across Europe. It's really quite remarkable when you stop to think about it. Looking back at all these stories, it's the sheer variety of their fates that I find so fascinating. How some became symbols of continuity, like Queen Victoria's brooches, while others, like the lost Russian diadem, are now just a heartbreaking memory. It makes you realize how fragile this legacy can be, and how lucky we are that so many have survived. But I would love to know what you think. Personally, while I think the symbolism for a bride is just beautiful, I find the wheat ears are at their most elegant as brooches or hair ornaments, like the way Queen Elizabeth or Queen Maxima used to wear them. What about you? Do you prefer the full tiara or the more understated pieces? Thank you so much for joining me today to explore these incredible stories. If you enjoyed this journey through history, I would be so grateful if you would consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps, and it means we can continue to uncover these wonderful histories together. Thank you again for watching.